Okay, listen up. This is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm going to tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. Today, we're laying down paint and building up boost in Trailblazers. Trailblazers is going to be a tough one to talk about. Here is a game that is all about cooperative team gameplay with nobody to team up with. Even with cross-platform compatibility, I couldn't find a single person in matchmaking. Which is kind of a shame, because the core concept behind Trailblazers is sound. The game is pitched as F-Zero meets Splatoon, with the idea that you paint the track your team's color, then drive over the paint to build boost. The painting mechanic is really interesting in a few different ways. For one, it does a really cool job of emulating slipstreaming. It also finds a nice healthy middle ground between racing games that have an emphasis on just making fewer mistakes than your opponent with few options to catch back up, and something like Mario Kart that designs options for last place to rubber band back to first, much to the chagrin of the guy who just ran a perfect race only to be foiled by a blue shell at the last second. There are no real catch-up mechanics in Trailblazers, but even if you fall behind and have no hope of ever seeing first place, you could still be useful, mucking up the opposing team's trails or maybe even attacking whoever's in first if they lap you. In essence, whoever's in last is your team's blue shell, and that middle ground between the two polar sides most multiplayer racers drift towards is something I deeply appreciate. There's also a fair bit of composition building in the game as well. You might want to run Lucas, who's all about using those paint trails to boost faster than anyone else on the track, and then have a teammate play Sid, whose whole shtick is putting those trails down. In that sense, each player kind of naturally falls into their own roles of what they specialize at and should be doing on the track to carry the team to victory. But as nice as the idea is on paper, I can't really tell you much about the execution. Without actual human teammates to play with, all of that theory crafting I just laid out goes out the window. If you've watched my review on Golem Gates, you know that I can still enjoy multiplayer-centric games even if they don't have a multiplayer community. But Golem Gates could still mechanically function in a 1v1 scenario against the AI, and had multiple interesting game modes. Trailblazers can really only be judged by its solo campaign, where all the interesting team play gets thrown out the window because there is no coordinating with the AI. And without the ability to work together, you can't really leverage Trailblazers' unique mechanics, and it becomes just another middling racing game. Technically, there's a story, but it's rife with so many issues ranging from one-dimensional characters that never get enough time to be fleshed out, to plot points that spring up haphazardly and some humor that tries to be meta and kinda just ends up being cringy. Mechanically, the controls aren't quite as tight as they could be, but still do just fine for getting you to the finish line, and you'll get the occasional moment where you finally hit 3 times boost and can finally feel that sense of breakneck ludicrous speed racing games are so great for. One particular quirk is that collision detection can feel a bit unnatural. The game is clearly focused on making sure you get stopped dead in your tracks as rarely as possible, as often a wall will deflect you rather than leave you stuck in the gutter as the game's entire roster passes you by, even if that means occasionally launching you in a direction that might leave physics scratching its head. It's a neat idea to keep the feeling of momentum going, but it also means that every wall is a bumper, and you're the pinball. It was pretty common for me to commit a small mistake that sent me bouncing back and forth 3 times from wall to wall. Outside of that, gameplay feels just kind of fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but ultimately I don't really feel like I experienced anything here that I couldn't find in other, more established racing games. Boost pads on a racing track aren't exactly new, and in single player the twist of being able to place them yourself is largely based on the whims of whether the AI behind you will paint over it or not. The one thing Trailblazers nails, however, is its aesthetic. With some really slick-looking maps, some stellar lighting, and an off-the-wall soundtrack you'd expect out of a jet-set radio game that's great to listen to so long as you don't have to do so for 5 hours straight. Presentation-wise, the game definitely has found a niche to carve out. It's loud, colorful, and quirky. It emulates a lot of the games I've mentioned, but in mashing so many together manages to preserve its own style without becoming incoherent. And with that, it's time for the verdict. I have to be honest, the lack of anyone to actually matchmake against nearly single-handedly sinks Trailblazers. And after pushing through the campaign, I'm not particularly inspired to pick this one back up. I feel a bit unfair judging a game so harshly just because it has no player base, but Trailblazers is just so heavily rooted in the cooperative play it was clearly designed for that there's just no way around it. I honestly feel like I can barely even give a proper review, because the core mechanic loses so much meaning and becomes haphazard when you're subject to the whims of the computer. With only AI to populate the racetrack, the game is a hollow shell of what it could have been. Hey, I hope you all enjoyed this episode of First 5. If you did, like, subscribe, or best of all, share this video around wherever you can. Trailblazers by Supergonk Games is available for the PC, PS4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. I'll see you all next week.